The blood pooling beneath Sergeant First Class Declan Morrow told him everything he needed to know. Femoral artery. Maybe nicked, maybe severed. Either way, the math was simple. For minutes until unconsciousness. 6 until death. The convoy ambush had scattered his squad across the valley road, and the last radio call he heard before the RPG hit was someone screaming about a second wave incoming. Now he lay in a drainage ditch, alone, the Afghan sun turning the dust into gold while his life leaked into the dirt. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from today. Maybe you have seen courage show up when it was needed most, in ways nobody expected. Morrow pressed his hands against his thigh, feeling the hot pulse of blood between his fingers. He had seen men die like this. Good men. His brother Connor had died like this, though that was training and not combat, and the difference had never made Morrow feel any better about it. The gunfire was moving away now, the ambush shifting east, but that just meant nobody was coming back for him. Not in time. He closed his eyes and thought about Boston, about the snow on Carson Beach in January, about his mother lighting candles at St. Bridget and praying for both her sons to come home, not knowing one of them never would. Then hands touched his leg. Morrow's eyes snapped open. A figure crouched over him, backlit by dust and smoke, features impossible to distinguish. Small frame, quick movements. A woman's voice, low and calm, cutting through the fog of blood loss with clinical precision. Arterial bleed, the voice said. I'm applying a tourniquet now. You will feel pressure. The pressure came, agonizing and absolute, and Morrow heard himself groan through clenched teeth. Good, the voice said. That means you are still conscious. Stay with me, Sergeant. How did she know his rank? He could not see any rank insignia in the haze. Could barely see anything except the silhouette working over him with hands that moved like they had done this 1,000 times. Who are you? He managed to say. She did not answer. He felt a needle slide into his arm, felt the cool rush of something that pushed the pain back just enough to think clearly. Extraction is 4 minutes out, she said. You're going to make it. Do you understand? You're going to make it. He wanted to grab her, to hold on, to make her stay until he could see her face. But his hands would not cooperate, and the drugs were pulling him down into a gray place where the gunfire sounded like rain on a tin roof. The last thing he remembered was the sound of helicopter rotors. When he opened his eyes again, he was in the medical tent at FOB Kestrel, his leg wrapped in bandages and 4-drip feeding fluids into his arm, and absolutely no idea who had saved his life. The first person Morrow asked was the nurse checking his vitals. She looked at him like he was still delirious from the drugs. There was no medic in your ditch, Sergeant. QRF found you alone with a tourniquet already applied. Whoever did it was gone before they arrived. That is impossible, Morrow said. She was right there. She talked to me. The nurse shrugged and made a note on her clipboard. You lost a lot of blood. People see things. But Morrow knew what he had seen. He knew what he had heard. A woman's voice telling him he would survive, hands that worked with terrifying efficiency, a presence that appeared from nowhere and vanished the same way. Over the next 2 days, he asked everyone, his squad members who had been recovered from the ambush site, the helicopter crew that extracted him, the official combat medic assigned to the convoy, a man named Whitley who swore he had been pinned down 200 meters away and never got anywhere near Morrow's position. Nobody had seen her, but the story started surfacing anyway, whispered in the chow line and muttered over cigarettes outside the barracks. A private named Odom said he'd been pulled from a burning vehicle 3 months ago by someone who disappeared before the flames died down. A sergeant from 3rd Platoon claimed a woman had appeared during a firefight and plugged a sucking chest wound that should have killed him, then vanished into a wadi before he could say thank you. They call her the Ghost Girl, Odom said, his voice dropping like he was sharing something sacred. Nobody knows who she is. Nobody ever sees her face. But if you're dying out there, really dying, sometimes she just appears. Morrow listened to every story. He collected them like evidence, looking for patterns, looking for proof. The Ghost Girl operated at night, mostly. She seemed to know where the wounded would be before anyone else. She never spoke more than necessary, never stayed longer than required. never left any trace except the soldiers who survived when they should not have. Some of the men thought she was an angel. Others thought she was a hallucination born from blood loss and trauma, a shared myth that helped them believe someone was watching over them in a place where death came without warning. Moro did not care where she was. He only cared that she was real. He lay in his cot on the third night, leg throbbing beneath the bandages, and stared at the canvas ceiling. Somewhere on this base, the ghost girl was breathing the same dust he was breathing, walking the same paths, maybe watching him right now, wondering if he would keep asking questions. He made a promise to himself, the same way he had made a promise over Connor's grave 4 years ago. He was going to find her. He was going to find the ghost girl if it was the last thing he did on this deployment. Because somewhere in the darkness of FOB Kestrel, she was waiting. And Declan Moro had never been able to let a mystery stay unsolved, especially not one that had given him back his life. Specialist Yara Okonkwo had not slept in 31 hours, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant her father's face, and her father's face meant waking up with tears on her cheeks and a grief so heavy it pressed the air from her lungs. Better to stay awake, better to keep moving, better to focus on the only thing that had ever made the weight feel lighter. She crouched in the supply bunker at 0300, the single overhead bulb casting yellow shadows across shelves of bandages and boxes of saline. Her personal medical kit lay open on the floor, and she checked each item with the same ritual precision her father had taught her when she was 12 years old. Tourniquet, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, nasopharyngeal airway, 14-gauge needle for decompression, morphine auto-injectors, 3 of them, borrowed from supplies that would not be inventoried for another week. Her hands did not shake when she worked. That was the strange thing, the thing nobody would ever believe if she told them. In daylight, in crowds, in any situation requiring her to speak or be seen, Yara Okonkwo trembled like a leaf in a storm. But here, alone, preparing to save lives that did not yet know they needed saving, her hands were steady as stone. She finished her inventory and zipped the kit closed. Through the bunker walls, she could hear the distant sounds of the base settling into its night rhythm. Guards changing shifts, generators humming. Somewhere, a soldier laughing at a joke she would never hear, because she would never be part of the group telling it. Yara slipped out of the bunker and moved through the shadows between buildings. She had memorized every patrol route, every blind spot, every camera angle. 6 months of careful observation had given her a map of FOB Kestrel that existed only in her mind, a map that showed her exactly how to become invisible. She passed the barracks where the other medics slept and felt the familiar twist of envy and relief. They had friends. They had conversations. They had the easy camaraderie that came from being normal, from being able to look someone in the eye without feeling like their gaze was a physical weight crushing her chest. Yara had none of that, but she had something else. She had purpose. The stray dog was waiting behind the motor pool, the same place he always waited. Yara had never named him because naming things meant attachment, and attachment meant loss, and she had lost enough already. But she knelt beside him anyway and scratched behind his ears while he pushed his graying muzzle into her palm. His paw was healing well. The cut had been deep, probably from scrap metal near the burn pit, but she had cleaned it and wrapped it and given him antibiotics meant for humans because the veterinary supplies on base were non-existent. He was the only creature at FOB Kestrel who knew her secret, and he could not tell anyone. "You are a good boy," she whispered, the only words she had spoken aloud in 3 days. Morning formation came too soon. Yara stood in the back row, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the flagpole, trying to make herself small enough to disappear. It never worked. She was the only woman in her platoon, and her silence made her conspicuous in a way that constant chatter might have avoided. The soldier next to her, a corporal named Brixton, muttered something about the heat. Yara nodded without looking at him. He said something else, probably a question, and she felt her throat close up the way it always did when someone expected her to speak. She managed a sound that might have been agreement. Brixton gave up and turned away, and she heard him whisper something to the man on his other side. The word weird drifted back to her, and she absorbed it the way she absorbed everything. Quietly, without visible reaction, adding it to the collection of judgments she carried like stones in her pockets. After formation, First Sergeant Calvin Briggs found her outside the medical supply building. He was the kind of soldier who always looked like he had just stepped out of a recruitment poster. Uniform pristine, boots gleaming, silver hair trimmed to regulation perfection. He smiled when he saw her, but his eyes did not match his mouth. "Specialist Okonkwo," he said, "I've been meaning to speak with you." Yara felt her heartbeat accelerate. She managed to meet his eyes for approximately half a second before her gaze dropped to his boots. "We have had some irregularities in the medical supply inventory," Briggs continued. "Items going missing. Bandages, morphine, tourniquets." He paused, letting the words settle. "You would not happen to know anything about that, would you?" "No, First Sergeant." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Briggs leaned closer. She could smell his aftershave, something expensive and aggressive that did not belong in a combat zone. "I'm going to be conducting a full investigation," he said. "Every medic on this base will be scrutinized, every record examined. If someone has been taking supplies for personal use or unauthorized purposes, I will find out." He smiled again. "And when I do, their career will be over. Do you understand?" "Yes, First Sergeant." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. Yara watched him go, her hands trembling at her sides, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The panic was rising now, the familiar tide that threatened to drown her whenever authority figures took notice of her existence. She found an empty corner behind the latrines and pressed her back against the plywood wall, forcing herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Hold for 4. Release for 4. The techniques her therapist had taught her before deployment, back when she still believed therapy could fix what was broken inside her. It took 5 minutes for the shaking to stop, 5 minutes for her heart rate to return to something approaching normal, 5 minutes for the determination to harden in her chest like cooling steel. Briggs could investigate all he wanted. He could scrutinize every record, interview every medic, count every bandage in every supply closet on the base. He would not find anything because Yara was careful. She was always careful, and she was not going to stop. That night, she monitored the radio frequencies she had learned to access during her second week on base. The encryption was not as sophisticated as the Army thought it was, and Yara had always been good with technology. Her father used to say she had a gift for finding the hidden pathways, the secret doors that others walked past without seeing. At 2247, a patrol called in contact. 3 kilometers east, near the village of Dara. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate medical support. The official Quick Reaction Force began mobilizing. Yara listened to the coordination chatter and calculated the response time. 8 minutes minimum. Probably closer to 10 given the terrain and the need for security elements. She'd check her bag. She could make it in 6. The decision was not really a decision at all. It was compulsion, instinct, the same force that had driven her to apply pressure to a wounded bird's wing when she was 4 years old, that had made her memorize her father's surgical textbooks before she finished elementary school, that had pulled her toward every hurt thing she had ever encountered with a gravity she could not resist. Yara slipped out of her quarters and into the darkness. The patrol routes had a gap at 2252, a 45-second window where no eyes would be watching the eastern perimeter. She hit the window perfectly and slid through a gap in the wire that she had identified 3 months ago. The desert swallowed her whole. Behind her, FOB Kestrel continued its night routine, unaware that one of its soldiers had just become a ghost. Ahead of her, men were dying. And somewhere between the two, Yara Okonkwo ran toward the sound of gunfire with steady hands and a heart that finally felt like it was beating for a reason. Moro had always been good at finding people who did not want to be found. Reconnaissance had been his specialty before he moved to infantry, and the skills never left. Observation, pattern recognition, the patience to watch and wait until the picture became clear. He started with the duty rosters. The medical section kept their schedules posted outside the aid station, and Morrow spent 3 days memorizing the patterns while pretending to visit for physical therapy on his leg. 12 medics assigned to FOB Kestrel, rotating through shifts that covered every hour of the day and night. He cross-referenced their schedules with the reported ghost girl sightings, looking for gaps, looking for anyone who was consistently unaccounted for during the times when impossible rescues occurred. The name that kept appearing was Specialist Yara Okonkwo. She was marked as quarters or latrine during 6 of the 8 incidents he had documented. Nobody else came close to that pattern. But when Morrow finally saw her in person, standing at the back of a formation with her eyes fixed on nothing, he could not reconcile what he observed with what he was looking for. She was small, slight. She moved like she would try to take up as little space as possible, shoulders curved inward, chin tucked down. When another soldier spoke to her, she flinched like the words were physical blows. This was not a woman who ran toward gunfire. This was a woman who looked like she might shatter if someone raised their voice. Sergeant Kenji Nakamura found Morrow watching her from across the motor pool and shook his head. "You are still chasing that ghost story," Nakamura said. "Brother, you need to let this go. She saved my life," Morrow replied without looking away from Yara. "Something saved your life. Adrenaline. Luck. A tourniquet that applied itself through pure survival instinct." Nakamura put a hand on Morrow's shoulder. "There is no ghost girl. There's just a story soldiers tell because it makes them feel like someone is watching over them in a place where nobody is watching over anyone. Then explain the other survivors. Explain Odom getting pulled from that vehicle. Explain Sergeant Reeves with a chest wound that should have killed him. Mass hysteria. Shared trauma. The human brain looking for patterns that do not exist." Nakamura shrugged. "I have seen it before. We all want to believe in angels when we are surrounded by death." Morrow said nothing. Nakamura eventually gave up and walked away, leaving him alone with his observations and his certainty that everyone else was wrong. That night, he positioned himself near the medical barracks with a clear sight line to Okonkwo's quarters. His leg ached from the walk, but pain had never stopped him from finishing a mission. He settled into the shadows and waited. At 0147, a figure slipped out of the building. She moved differently in the darkness. The hunched shoulders straightened. The hesitant steps became fluid and purposeful. She navigated between buildings with the confidence of someone who had memorized every obstacle, every shadow, every potential witness. Morrow followed at a distance, impressed despite himself at how difficult she was to track. She disappeared near the eastern perimeter. He tried to follow, but lost her somewhere past the motor pool. One moment, she was a silhouette against the distant lights, and the next she was simply gone, absorbed into the night like she had never existed at all. 3 kilometers east of FOB Kestrel, Yara reached the ambush site in 5 minutes and 43 seconds. The firefight was still active, muzzle flashes strobing through the darkness, but she had learned to read the rhythm of combat. The heaviest fire was concentrated on the northern ridge. The wounded would be in the drainage culvert to the south, where the patrol had taken cover during the initial contact. She found them exactly where she expected. 3 soldiers, 2 with moderate injuries, 1 critical. The critical case was a specialist named Dunbar, early 20s, shrapnel wounds to the abdomen and a tension pneumothorax that was killing him faster than the blood loss. Yara dropped beside him and went to work. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his lips turning blue in the moonlight. She pulled out her 14-gauge needle and located the second intercostal space, midclavicular line. The insertion was textbook. She felt the rush of air escaping the pleural cavity, watched his chest begin to rise more evenly, heard the desperate gasping ease into something closer to normal respiration. The other 2 soldiers stared at her with wide eyes. "Who the hell are you?" one of them asked. Yara did not answer. She was already moving to the next patient, a corporal with a Thruff hand-throw gunshot wound to the shoulder. She packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, applied pressure, wrapped it tight. The corporal groaned, but did not scream. Good pain tolerance. He would make it. The 3rd soldier had a fractured tibia, bone visible through torn flesh. Compound fracture, contaminated with dirt and debris. Infection risk was high, but the immediate concern was stabilization. She splinted the leg with materials from her kit, immobilizing the break, then administered a morphine auto-injector for the pain. QRF is 3 minutes out, she said, her voice low and calm. Keep pressure on that shoulder wound. Do not let him move the leg. Then she was gone. She melted into the ravine before the soldiers could process what had happened. Behind her, she heard one of them say something about an angel, and she felt the familiar discomfort that came whenever anyone noticed her existence. But the discomfort was distant now, muffled by the satisfaction of 3 lives saved, 3 families who would not receive the worst phone call of their lives. Back at FOB Kestrel, Morrow waited near the eastern perimeter until 0340. He never saw her return, but when he checked the morning sick call roster, he found 3 new patients from a patrol ambush. All 3 had survived injuries that should have been fatal. All 3 reported being treated by a woman who appeared from nowhere and vanished before help arrived. And Specialist Yara Okonkwo was marked as latrine during the entire incident. Morrow knew he was right. He knew she was real. But knowing and proving were different things, and he was beginning to understand that catching the ghost girl would require more than observation. It would require getting close to a woman who had turned invisibility into an art form. He started planning his next move. The pattern was clear now, undeniable to anyone willing to look. Every ghost girl incident corresponded with a gap in Okonkwo's documented whereabouts. Every impossible rescue happened when she was supposedly somewhere mundane, somewhere unverifiable, somewhere that allowed her to slip away without anyone noticing. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would stop watching from a distance. Tomorrow he would find a way to make her see that he was not a threat, that he was not trying to expose her or stop her or turn her in. He just wanted to understand. And maybe, if he was lucky, he wanted to say thank you to the woman who had given him back his life when he was bleeding out in a ditch with nothing but dust and desperation for company. The ghost girl had saved him once. Now, it was time to find out why. First Sergeant Briggs had built his entire career on one simple principle. Take credit for success, assign blame for failure, and never let anyone see you sweat. It had carried him from private to senior enlisted leader in 19 years, a spotless record that gleamed like polished brass whenever promotion boards reviewed his file. The ghost girl threatened everything. He stood in his office reviewing incident reports, each one a small humiliation wrapped in paper. Soldiers surviving wounds that should have killed them. Medical responses occurring before official channels were even notified. Someone on his base was operating outside the chain of command, making decisions without authorization, and the men were starting to whisper that maybe the official leadership was not as essential as they thought. Briggs could not allow that perception to spread. He summoned Specialist Whitley, the senior combat medic on base, and laid out his concerns. Someone is taking supplies, Briggs said. Someone is conducting unauthorized medical operations. I want to know who. Whitley shifted uncomfortably. First Sergeant, the soldiers who survived those incidents are not complaining. If someone is helping them, maybe we should just be grateful. Grateful? Briggs let the word hang in the air like something rotten. You want me to be grateful that someone is undermining proper military protocol, that someone is making this command look incompetent. I just meant that the outcomes have been positive. The outcomes are irrelevant. Briggs leaned forward. What matters is order. What matters is discipline. What matters is that when soldiers need medical attention, they receive it through proper channels with proper documentation and proper accountability. Not from some phantom playing hero in the dark. He assigned Whitley to monitor all medic activities, to track every supply request, to report any irregularities directly to him. Whitley agreed because Whitley always agreed with whoever held power over his career. That was another thing Briggs had learned in 19 years. Everyone could be managed if you understood their leverage points. Yara did not know about the expanded surveillance when she returned from her quarters that afternoon. She only knew that the stray dog was not in his usual spot behind the motor pool, and that small absence felt like a bad omen. She found him eventually, hiding under a broken generator, whimpering softly. Someone had kicked him. She could see the bruise forming on his ribs, could feel him flinch when she touched his side. The anger that rose in her chest was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, a heat that had nowhere to go, because she could never confront whoever had done this. "I am sorry," she whispered, stroking his head. "I am so sorry." She treated his injuries with supplies from her personal kit, gave him water from her canteen, and sat with him until the whimpering stopped. The world was full of creatures who hurt other creatures for no reason. She had learned that lesson long ago. All she could do was fix what she could fix and accept that some damage was beyond repair. The voice came from behind her. "Specialist Okonkwo." Yara's heart seized. She turned to find Sergeant First Class Morrow standing at the edge of the motor pool. Weight shifted to favor his healing leg, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the ground. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "I know what you do." The world tilted. Yara felt the panic rising, the familiar flood that would drown her if she let it. She opened her mouth to deny everything, to claim ignorance, to run, but her voice would not cooperate. Morrow held up his hands, palms out, the universal gesture of peace. "I am not here to turn you in. I am not here to stop you." He took a careful step closer. "I am here to say thank you." Yara stared at him. The words did not make sense. People did not thank her. People did not notice her. That was the entire point. "You saved my life," Morrow continued. "In that ditch after the ambush. You appeared out of nowhere, stopped my bleeding, kept me alive until extraction arrived." He paused. "I have been trying to find you ever since. Not to expose you, just to understand." The silence stretched between them. Yara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the dog pressing against her leg, could smell the dust and diesel that permeated everything on this base. She should run. She should deny. She should do anything except stand here, letting a stranger see her. "Why?" she finally managed. The word came out cracked and broken. "Why what? Why do you need to understand?" Morrow was quiet for a moment. "Because my brother died the same way I almost did. Bleeding out, waiting for help that came too late." He swallowed. "I have spent 4 years wondering if someone like you could have saved him. If there was a ghost girl somewhere who just was not close enough that day." Yara felt something shift in her chest. The panic was still there, but beneath it, something else was emerging. Recognition. The sense of meeting someone who understood loss the way she understood it, who carried the weight of absence the same way she did. "I cannot stop," she said. "I know I should. I know is against regulations. But when I hear them on the radio, when I know they're dying and I can reach them faster than anyone else, I cannot make myself stay behind." Her voice was steadier now, surprising her. "It is the only thing that makes me feel like I am supposed to be here." Morrow nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to stop." "Then what do you want?" He considered the question. "Maybe just to know that you are real. That the ghost girl is not just a story soldiers tell themselves. That somewhere on this base, there is someone who runs toward the dying when everyone else is running away." Yara looked at him, really looked for the first time since he appeared. She saw the pain in his leg, the grief behind his eyes, the desperate need to believe in something good. She saw a man who had been saved and could not rest until he understood why. "I am real," she said quietly. "But I'm not a ghost, and I'm not a girl. I'm just someone who cannot watch people die when I know how to save them." Morrow smiled, and the expression transformed his face from wounded soldier to something almost gentle. "That is more than enough," he said. "And if you ever need help, if you ever need someone to cover for you, or watch your back, or just know where you are in case something goes wrong, I owe you a debt I intend to repay." Yara did not know how to respond to that. Nobody had ever offered to help her before. Nobody had ever seen her clearly enough to know she needed it. Before she could find words, the base loudspeakers crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel. Effective immediately, a 72-hour accountability formation is in effect. All soldiers will report to their designated assembly areas and remain accounted for until further notice. Any unauthorized movement will result in immediate detention." This is not a drill. Yara felt the blood drain from her face. 72 hours. 3 days of being watched, being counted, being visible every moment. 3 days where she could not slip away, could not answer the calls that came over the radio, could not be the ghost girl. 3 days where soldiers might die because she was not there to save them. She looked at Morrow, and he looked back, and neither of them needed to say what they were both thinking. The ghost girl had just been grounded, and in a war zone, 3 days was a lifetime. The first call came 6 hours into the lockdown. Yara sat in the assembly area with 200 other soldiers, her small radio receiver hidden beneath her uniform, the earpiece threaded up through her collar and tucked behind her hair. She was not supposed to have the device. She had built it herself from salvaged parts, a habit left over from her father, teaching her that resourcefulness mattered more than regulations. Now she wished she had never learned. Contact, contact. The voice crackled with static and fear. Patrol Bravo 7 taking fire. Grid reference Echo 49er. We have 1 wounded, requesting immediate medevac. Yara closed her eyes. Grid reference Echo 49er was less than 2 kilometers away. She could visualize the terrain, the rocky outcropping where the patrol had probably taken cover, the narrow valley that channeled sound and made distances deceptive. She knew exactly how to reach them. She knew exactly what supplies she would need. And she could not move. First Sergeant Briggs walked the formation lines with his clipboard, counting heads, checking names, making sure every soldier was exactly where they were supposed to be. His eyes found Yara in the crowd and lingered for a moment, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He knew something, or he suspected something. Either way, he was enjoying this. The radio chattered again. Medevac is 15 minutes out. Corporal Vasquez is losing blood fast. Someone get us some help out here. 15 minutes. Yara had treated enough arterial wounds to know what 15 minutes meant. It meant the difference between a soldier going home to his family and a soldier going home in a box. It meant that somewhere in the darkness, a young man was watching his life leak out onto Afghan soil while she sat in formation, being counted like inventory. She pressed her fingernails into her palms until the pain gave her something to focus on besides the voice in her earpiece. Private First Class Tomas Elizondo appeared at her side during the shift change between accountability checks. He was the only person on base besides Morrow who knew her secret, a quiet young man from El Paso who had discovered her sneaking out during his second week at Kestrel and had chosen to cover for her instead of reporting her. She had never fully understood why. "You're listening," he said softly. "You need to stop listening." "I cannot." "You have to." Elizondo's voice was gentle but firm. "There is nothing you can do right now. Torturing yourself will not save anyone." Yara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She reached up and removed the earpiece, letting the voices fade into silence. The absence was worse than the noise. At least when she could hear them, she knew what was happening. Now she could only imagine. The second call came 12 hours later. Yara had retrieved her earpiece during a latrine break, unable to resist the pull of knowing. A convoy had hit an IED on the main supply route. Multiple casualties. The official response was delayed by a secondary threat, possible ambush, the same tactic that had nearly killed Morrow 2 weeks ago. She listened to the medic on scene describe the injuries. One soldier with bilateral leg amputations. One with severe burns. One with a head wound that required immediate intervention to prevent brain swelling. The medic was overwhelmed, his voice cracking as he tried to triage patients who all needed more than he could give. Yara sat in her quarters, door closed, hands pressed over her ears, even though the sound was coming from inside her head. She could save them. She knew she could save them. The amputee needed tourniquets high and tight. The burn victim needed airway management. The head wound needed pressure relief that could be performed with a simple drill. But she was here, accounted for, visible, helpless. The third call came on the morning of the second day. Private Josiah Crane, 19 years old, from a small town in Georgia that Yara had never heard of. He had been part of a foot patrol that stumbled into an ambush near the village of Dara. The initial reports said he took shrapnel to the neck, nicking the carotid artery. The kind of wound that killed in minutes without immediate intervention. The kind of wound Yara had treated successfully 4 times in the past 6 months. She listened to the frantic radio traffic, the calls for medevac, the desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. She listened to the voice of his squad leader, a sergeant named Hoffman, begging someone to help, telling Crane to stay with him, promising that help was coming. Help came too late. Private Josiah Crane was pronounced dead at FOB Kestrel at 0847, 43 minutes after the initial contact. The official cause of death was catastrophic blood loss from a penetrating neck wound. The official report would note that all proper protocols were followed, that the response time was within acceptable parameters, that nothing more could have been done. Yara knew better. She stood at the back of the memorial service, watching the flag being folded, listening to the chaplain speak words that were meant to bring comfort and brought nothing. Crane's photograph sat on a small table beside his boots and rifle, a tradition she had witnessed too many times since arriving in Afghanistan. He looked young in the picture, younger than 19. He looked like someone who still believed the world made sense. First Sergeant Briggs delivered remarks about duty and sacrifice. His voice was steady, practiced, the voice of a man who had given this speech before and would give it again. He spoke about the importance of following orders, of trusting the chain of command, of accepting that some things were beyond their control. His eyes found Yara in the crowd as he said the last part. She understood then that the lockdown had not been about accountability. It had been about her. Briggs had known, or at least suspected, and he had found a way to cage her without ever having to prove anything. He had let a soldier die to make a point. The rage that filled her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It burned through the anxiety, through the fear, through the careful wall she had built around herself. For the first time in her life, Yara Okonkwo wanted to hurt someone, but she did not act on it. She stood in silence as the service ended, as the soldiers dispersed, as the sun climbed higher over a base that felt more like a prison than ever before. That night, with 8 hours left in the lockdown, she made a decision. No more waiting. No more hiding while people died. No more letting men like Briggs control whether she could answer the call that had defined her entire life. Tomorrow, when the lockdown lifted, she would go back to being the ghost girl. And if Briggs tried to stop her, if he tried to court-martial her or destroy her career, she would accept the consequences. Because some things mattered more than regulations. Some things mattered more than safety. And Josiah Crane, 19 years old, from a small town in Georgia, had mattered more than Yara's fear of being caught. She owed him that much. She owed all of them that much. The lockdown ended at 0600 on the third day. By 0603, Yara was already planning her next operation. She moved through the base with a new energy. The grief over Crane's death transformed into something harder and more useful. The anxiety was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but she had learned something during those 72 hours of helplessness. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. Morrow found her behind the supply bunker that evening, checking her kit with the same methodical precision she always used. He watched her work for a moment before speaking. "You're going out tonight." It was not a question. Yara nodded without looking up. "Let me come with you." Now she did look up, her eyes meeting his for perhaps the third time since they had met. The suggestion was absurd. He was still limping from his wound. He had no medical training. He would slow her down, compromise her stealth, put both of them at risk. "No," she said. Morrow lowered himself to sit on an empty crate, grimacing as his leg protested. "I'm not asking to help with the medical work. I know I would be useless at that, but I can watch your back. I can make sure nobody sees you leave or return. I could be your alibi if Briggs comes looking. You would risk your career for me. You saved my life." He said it simply, like the answer was obvious. "Besides, someone needs to know where you are. What happens if you get hurt out there? What happens if you need extraction and nobody knows to come looking?" Yara had never considered that possibility. She had always operated on the assumption that she would either succeed or die trying, and that either outcome was acceptable as long as she was not a burden on anyone else. The idea that someone might worry about her, might come looking for her, was foreign enough to be uncomfortable. "I work alone," she said. "You have been working alone." Morrow leaned forward. "But you do not have to." The silence between them stretched into something that felt almost like understanding. Yara thought about the lockdown, about listening to soldiers die while she sat helpless in formation. She thought about Crane's photograph and the folded flag and the words Briggs had spoken while looking directly at her. She thought about all the nights she had slipped into the darkness with no one knowing where she was or whether she would return. Maybe having someone know was not weakness. Maybe it was wisdom. Fine, she said, but you stay at the perimeter. You do not follow me into the field. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. Morrow nodded. Deal. They moved out at 2200, using the gap in patrol coverage that Yara had identified months ago. Morrow was slower than she would have liked, his leg forcing a pace that made her twitch with impatience. But he was quieter than she expected. He knew how to move in darkness, how to place his feet to avoid noise, how to become part of the shadows rather than fighting against them. They reached the eastern perimeter, and Yara pointed to a rocky outcropping with good sight lines. Wait here. Watch for patrols. If anyone comes, click your radio twice. She handed him a small device, another of her homemade creations. He took it without comment and settled into position. Be careful, he said. Yara did not respond. She was already moving, slipping through the wire and into the darkness beyond. The call had come in 20 minutes earlier. A small observation post 3 kilometers north was reporting a soldier down with suspected appendicitis. Not a combat wound, but potentially just as deadly if the appendix ruptured before evacuation could be arranged. The official medevac was delayed by weather, helicopter grounded until conditions improved. Yara reached the observation post in 18 minutes, arriving at the perimeter with her hands raised and her voice low. I'm a medic from Kestrel. I heard your call. Let me help. The soldiers at the post were too desperate to ask questions. They led her to their fallen comrade, a specialist named Ruiz who was curled in a fetal position, face gray with pain, abdomen rigid under her touch. Classic presentation. The appendix had not ruptured yet, but it would soon. She could not operate here. She did not have the equipment or the sterile environment, but she could buy time. She started in 4, administered antibiotics to fight the infection that was already building, gave him morphine for the pain. She explained to the soldiers watching that they needed to keep him still, keep him hydrated, monitor for signs of rupture. If his pain suddenly decreased, that was bad. It meant the appendix had burst and toxins were flooding his system. Medevac should arrive within 2 hours, she said. He will make it if you follow my instructions. One of the soldiers, a young corporal with wide eyes, grabbed her arm as she turned to leave. Who are you? He asked. Are you the ghost girl? Yara felt the familiar discomfort, the urge to flee from recognition. But she thought about Crane, about the cost of remaining invisible, as she forced herself to meet the corporal's eyes. I'm just a medic, she said. Tell the doctors what I told you. Keep him alive until they arrive. Then she disappeared into the night. Morrow was exactly where she had left him, scanning the darkness with the patience of a man who had spent years watching and waiting. He looked up as she approached, relief visible even in the shadows. Did you save him? Bottom time. The rest is up to the helicopter. They made their way back to base, moving through the patrol gaps, slipping past the guard towers, entering FOB Kestrel like they had never left. At the edge of the medical barracks, Morrow stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. I understand now, he said quietly. I understand why you do this. Yara looked at him, waiting. It is not about being a hero. It is not about recognition or glory or proving anything to anyone. He paused, choosing his words carefully. It is about the fact that you cannot live with yourself if you do not try. It is about being unable to accept that death might win when you have the skills to stop it. She nodded slowly. My father was a surgeon. He used to say that every life saved was a debt repaid to the universe. That we are all here because someone, somewhere, chose to help instead of looking away. And the ghost girl is how you repay your debt. The ghost girl is how I stay sane, Yara corrected. It is how I make the weight bearable. It is the only thing I have ever been good at. Morrow looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen directed at herself before. Not pity, not confusion, not the dismissive judgment she had grown accustomed to receiving. Respect. Then we make sure you can keep doing it, he said. Whatever Briggs throws at us, whatever investigations or lockdowns or obstacles, we find a way around them. You save lives, and I watch your back. Deal. Yara felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of isolation that had been tightening for years. She was not alone anymore. For the first time since her father died, someone saw her for who she really was and wanted to help instead of fix her. Deal, she said. They parted ways outside the barracks, and Yara slipped into her quarters feeling something unfamiliar. It took her a moment to identify it, to put a name to the warmth spreading through her exhausted body. Hope. But as she settled onto her cot, she did not notice the figure watching from the shadows of the guard tower. Briggs lowered his binoculars and smiled, his expression cold and satisfied in the darkness. He had found his ghost at last. Briggs did not move immediately. He was a patient man when patience served his purposes, and destroying the ghost girl required more than suspicion. It required evidence. Witnesses. A case so airtight that no commanding officer could dismiss it as rumor or misunderstanding. He began building that case the morning after he watched Yara return from her unauthorized mission. Meanwhile, Yara and Morrow fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural. She would monitor the radio frequencies, identify situations where official response would be too slow, and slip out through her carefully mapped routes. He would position himself at predetermined points, watching for patrols, ready to create diversions if needed, always knowing exactly where she was and when to expect a return. They did not speak much during these operations. Words were unnecessary when the work itself was the conversation. But in the quiet moments between missions, sitting in the shadows behind the motor pool or the supply bunker, they began to share pieces of themselves that neither had shown to anyone else. Morrow told her about Connor. His brother had been 22, fresh out of officer candidate school, assigned to the same base where Morrow was serving as a senior NCO. It should have been a gift, having family close during deployment. Instead, it had become a curse. We were running a training exercise, Morrow said, his voice low and heavy with memory. Night navigation, standard stuff. Connor's group got separated from the main element. I was supposed to be monitoring their position, but I got distracted. Radio chatter from another unit, some minor issue that seemed important at the time. He paused, and Yara waited. She had learned that silence was sometimes the greatest kindness you could offer someone carrying grief. By the time I realized they were off course, they had walked into a ravine. Connor fell, 30 feet on her rocks. The medic could not reach him in time. Morrow's hands clenched into fists. He bled out while I was dealing with something that did not matter at all. You blame yourself. Every day. Morrow looked at her, and in the darkness his eyes were wet. Every single day, I wonder what would have happened if I had been paying attention. If I had caught the deviation earlier. If I had been the brother he needed instead of the sergeant who let him down. Yara understood that weight. She carried a version of it herself. My father died when I was 17, she said. Heart attack. He was alone in his office, working late like he always did. By the time anyone found him, it was too late. I am sorry. He taught me everything I know about medicine. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself small the way she always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. He used to say that knowledge was worthless if you did not use it to help people. That every skill we develop creates an obligation to the world. And now you honor that obligation by being the ghost girl. Now I try to make sure no one else dies alone, waiting for help that does not come in time. Yara's voice cracked slightly. I cannot save my father, but I can save other people's fathers. Other people's brothers, other people's children. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had finally found someone who understood their particular brand of brokenness. The next day, Yara encountered something unexpected. She was leaving the mess hall, trying to navigate the crowd without making eye contact with anyone, when a young private stepped in her path. He was barely 18, face still carrying the softness of adolescence, and he looked at her with an expression she did not recognize. Specialist Okonkwo, he said, I wanted to thank you. Yara froze. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had he seen her? Did he know? Was this the moment when everything fell apart? My buddy was at Opie Raven last week, The private continued. Ruiz, the one with the appendix. The doctor said he would have died if someone had not stabilized him before the medevac arrived. He paused, swallowing hard. They said it was the ghost girl who saved him. Yara felt the familiar panic rising, the desperate urge to flee from any form of recognition. But something in the private's face held her in place. Gratitude, pure and uncomplicated, the gratitude of someone whose friend was alive because of her. I do not know who the ghost girl is, she managed to say. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. The private nodded, but his eyes said he suspected more than he was admitting. Well, whoever she is a hero. The whole base is talking about her. Some of the guys think she is an angel. Others think she is special forces, someone too classified to acknowledge. He smiled shyly. I think she is just someone who cares more about saving lives than following rules. He walked away before Yara could respond, leaving her standing in the middle of the path with her heart pounding and her hands trembling. She found Morrow behind the medical barracks and told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, then surprised her with a question she had not expected. How did it feel? What? Being thanked, being recognized, even indirectly. How did it feel? Yara considered the question. The panic had been real, the overwhelming desire to disappear. But beneath the panic, buried under years of avoidance and fear, there had been something else. Something warm. Terrifying, she admitted. But also, she struggled to find the right word. Also not entirely terrible. Morrow smiled. Maybe being seen is not always the enemy. Before Yara could respond, Elizondo appeared at the corner of the building, his face tight with worry. Captain Sorensen wants to see you, he said to Morrow. Now, she said it is urgent. Morrow exchanged a glance with Yara, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. Sorensen was fair, but she was also military to her core. If Briggs had brought his suspicions to her, if he had started building his case, the captain would have no choice but to act. Stay calm, Morrow said quietly. We do not know anything yet. He followed Elizondo toward the command building, and Yara watched him go with a growing sense of dread. The alliance they had built over the past week suddenly felt fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. She retreated to her quarters and waited, listening to her hidden radio, jumping at every sound outside her door. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. When a knock finally came, she nearly screamed. But it was only Elizondo, his face unreadable. Morrow is back, he said. Sorensen did not know anything specific. She just wanted to warn him that Briggs is building a case against someone in the medical section. She does not know who yet, but she told Morrow to be careful. Yara exhaled slowly, the relief almost painful. But Elizondo was not finished. There's something else, he said. Intelligence picked up chatter. Taliban are planning something big. They think it might be an assault on the base itself. Sorensen is putting everyone on high alert. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. If the base was attacked, there would be mass casualties. The kind of chaos where the ghost girl could save dozens of lives, or where the ghost girl could be exposed once and for all. Either way, Yara realized the end was coming. She just did not know yet what form it would take. Briggs made his move 3 days after the intelligence warning. He stood in Captain Sorensen's office with a folder thick enough to be impressive, laying out his evidence with the practiced confidence of a man who had spent his career building cases against people who threatened his authority. Supply discrepancies dating back 5 months, he said, spreading documents across her desk. Morphine, tourniquets, hemostatic agents, all going missing in small amounts that add up to a significant pattern. Duty roster irregularities showing specialist Okonkwo consistently unaccounted for during times when unauthorized medical interventions were reported. Sorensen studied the papers with a neutral expression. She was a careful officer, the kind who never revealed her thoughts until she had gathered all available information. Unauthorized medical interventions, she repeated. You mean the Ghost Girl incidents? I mean a soldier operating outside the chain of command, conducting unsanctioned operations, and making this entire unit look incompetent. Briggs leaned forward. I am recommending an Article 15 proceeding at minimum. Court-martial if the evidence supports it. And what does the evidence support? First Sergeant. That Specialist Okonkwo has been stealing medical supplies and using them to conduct unauthorized treatment of wounded personnel without proper oversight or documentation. Sorensen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured. The soldiers she allegedly treated. Are any of them dead? No, ma'am. Are any of them filing complaints? No, ma'am. But that is not the point. Then what is the point, First Sergeant? Briggs straightened, his jaw tightening. The point is discipline. The point is order. The point is that we cannot have soldiers deciding on their own when and how to operate outside established protocols. Sorensen gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder. I will review your evidence, she said. In the meantime, Specialist Okonkwo is to be confined to quarters pending investigation. No duty assignments, no unauthorized movement. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am. Briggs left the office with the satisfied expression of a man who had won. Sorensen watched him go, then pulled out her personal phone and sent a brief message. Yara was in her quarters when the MPs arrived. She did not resist, did not argue, did not do anything except nod quietly when they explained that she was confined pending investigation. She had known this moment would come eventually. She had just hoped it would come later. Elizondo appeared at her door an hour after the MPs left, his face pale with worry. Moro is trying to help, he said. He is gathering statements from soldiers you saved, building a counter case. It will not matter. Yara sat on her cot, hands folded in her lap, voice flat. Briggs has regulations on his side. I violated protocol. Repeatedly. Whatever good I did does not change that. How can you be so calm about this? Because I knew the cost when I started. She looked up at him, and for once her eyes did not shy away from contact. Every time I went out, I knew I might get caught. I knew my career might end. I decided the lives I could save were worth more than my future. Elizondo sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You are the bravest person I have ever met, he said quietly. And I do not mean the Goenjino combat kind of brave. I mean the choosing to help when it costs you everything kind of brave. Yara did not know how to respond to that. She had never thought of herself as brave. Compelled, maybe, driven by something she could not control. But brave implied a choice, and most of the time it did not feel like she had one. The bass alarm shattered the silence between them. The sound was unmistakable, a wailing siren that meant only one thing. Attack! Enemy forces were hitting FOB Kestrel, and from the rapid-fire chatter that erupted on every radio frequency, they were hitting it hard. Elizondo jumped to his feet. Stay here. You are confined. If you leave, Briggs will have everything he needs. But Yara was already reaching for her medical kit, the one she had hidden under a loose floorboard weeks ago in case of exactly this situation. There are going to be casualties, she said. Mass casualties. The medical tent cannot handle what is coming. Yara, please. She looked at him, and for once there was no anxiety in her expression. No fear of being seen. Only clarity. I'm a medic, Tomas. This is what I do. If they court-martial me tomorrow, at least I will know I did everything I could tonight. The explosion that rocked the building ended the argument. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere outside, men were screaming. Elizondo grabbed his weapon and moved toward the door. Then promise me you will not die out there. Yara almost smiled. I promise to try. She slipped out of her quarters and into chaos. The base was under assault from multiple directions. Tracers lit the darkness like angry fireflies, and the thump of mortars created a rhythm of destruction that shook the ground beneath her feet. Soldiers ran past her, some heading toward the perimeter, others dragging wounded comrades toward the medical tent. Yara moved against the flow, heading toward the sounds of the heaviest fighting. She knew from experience that the worst casualties would be at the point of contact, where the initial breach had occurred and where the medical response would be slowest to arrive. She found the first wounded soldier behind a concrete barrier, a sergeant with shrapnel wounds to the chest and abdomen. He was conscious but fading, his breathing shallow and rapid. Stay with me, Yara said, dropping to her knees beside him. I'm going to help you. She worked quickly, packing the worst wounds, establishing an airway, doing everything she could to buy him time. When she finished, she flagged down a passing soldier and directed him to get the sergeant to triage. Then she moved on to the next one, and the next, and the next. The battle raged around her, bullets snapping overhead, explosions sending debris raining down, but Yara moved through it all with a focus that bordered on supernatural. She was not the ghost girl anymore. She was something else entirely, a force of nature dressed in dusty fatigues, appearing wherever the dying needed her most. Morrow found her near the motor pool, treating a private with a traumatic amputation. His leg was bleeding despite his own injuries, a graze wound on his arm that he had wrapped with a torn piece of his uniform. "You are supposed to be confined," he shouted over the noise. Yara did not look up from her work. "You are supposed to be in a hospital." He laughed despite everything, a sound that seemed impossible in the middle of so much destruction. "The medical tent just took a direct hit," he said, and the laughter died. "Main triage is gone. Dozens of wounded with nowhere to go." Yara finished tying off the tourniquet and looked up at him. Her face was streaked with blood and dust, her eyes bright with something that might have been fear or might have been purpose. "Let me make a new triage," she said. "Right here, right now." She stood and looked around at the chaos, at the wounded being dragged in from every direction, at the soldiers who did not know what to do or where to go. For the first time in her life, the ghost girl stepped fully into the light, and she started giving orders. Yara had never commanded anything in her life. She had spent 24 years avoiding attention, shrinking from leadership, letting others take charge while she faded into the background. But standing in the middle of FOB Kestrel with wounded soldiers bleeding out in every direction and no functioning medical facility to receive them, something inside her shifted. She pointed to a concrete storage building that had survived the initial assault. "There," she shouted, her voice carrying with an authority she did not know she possessed. "We set up triage there. Bring me every wounded soldier you can find. Walking wounded to the left, critical to the right, dead to the back. Move." Soldiers who had been standing frozen in shock suddenly had direction. They scattered, dragging casualties toward the building, organizing themselves around her commands like iron filings around a magnet. Yara did not have time to marvel at the transformation. She was already moving toward the first critical patient. The night became a blur of blood and adrenaline. She treated a corporal with a sucking chest wound, sealing it with plastic from an MRE package when she ran out of proper chest seals. She performed a field tracheotomy on a sergeant whose throat had been crushed by debris, using a pin barrel to maintain his airway. She held pressure on arterial bleeds until her arms shook with exhaustion, then switched hands and kept holding. Other medics arrived and fell into her rhythm without question. Whitley, the same specialist Briggs had assigned to monitor her, worked beside her with an expression of stunned respect. A young private she did not recognize became her runner, fetching supplies, relaying messages, doing whatever she needed without hesitation. Morrow organized the non-medical personnel into a support structure. Stretcher bearers, security for the improvised triage, communication runners to coordinate with the defensive perimeter. He was everywhere at once, his wounded leg forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The battle continued to rage beyond their makeshift hospital. The Taliban had committed significant forces to this assault, more than intelligence had predicted, and the defensive lines were stretched thin. But FOB Kestrel was holding. Barely. Yara was elbow-deep in an abdominal wound when she heard the name that made her blood run cold. "First Sergeant Briggs is down," someone shouted. "North perimeter. Multiple wounds." She looked up and met Morrow's eyes across the chaos. He shook his head slightly, a warning. "Let someone else handle it. Let the man who tried to destroy you face the consequences of his own cowardice." But Yara was already moving. She found Briggs behind a sandbag emplacement, surrounded by soldiers who did not know what to do. He had taken rounds to the shoulder and thigh, serious but survivable with proper treatment. His face was gray with pain and something else, something that looked like shame. The soldiers around him were not treating his wounds. They were not even looking at him. They were looking at a body on the ground beside him, a young specialist with a bullet hole in his back. He froze. One of the soldiers said, his voice cracking with fury. We were taking fire, and he just froze. Kowalski tried to cover him and took a round mint for his useless hide. Yara processed the information in an instant. Briggs had frozen under fire. A soldier had died protecting him. The same man who preached about discipline and protocol had failed the most basic test of combat leadership. She knelt beside him anyway. "What are you doing?" Briggs gasped. His eyes were wild, uncomprehending. "I was going to court-martial you." "I know." Yara began treating his wounds with the same efficiency she applied to every patient. "But I am a medic, and you are wounded. Why would you help me?" She paused, meeting his eyes for the first time without flinching. "Because this is who I am," she said quietly. "I do not get to choose who deserves to be saved. I just save them." She finished stabilizing his wounds and directed 2 soldiers to carry him to triage. Briggs did not resist. He did not say anything at all. He just stared at her with an expression she could not read as they carried him away. The battle turned 2 hours before dawn. A combination of Apache helicopters from a nearby FOB and a well-timed counterattack broke the Taliban assault. The enemy forces retreated into the mountains, leaving behind their dead and the wreckage of their failed offensive. As the gunfire faded, an eerie quiet settled over FOB Kestrel. Soldiers emerged from cover, blinking in the gray, pre-dawn light, taking stock of the destruction around them. The perimeter walls were cratered and scorched. Buildings smoldered. The medical tent was a collapsed ruin. But in the concrete storage building that Yara had commandeered, 37 soldiers were still alive. 37 soldiers who would have died without functioning triage. 37 soldiers who owed their survival to the ghost girl who had finally stopped hiding. Yara sat on an overturned crate outside the building, her hands still gloved and bloody, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had not slept in over 20 hours. She had treated more casualties in one night than she had in the previous 6 months combined. And she had done it all in plain sight, with her name known, her face visible, her secret completely and irrevocably exposed. Morrow lowered himself beside her, grimacing as his leg protested. "You saved Briggs," he said. "I saved a wounded soldier. After everything he did. After he tried to destroy you." Yara looked at her bloody hands, at the proof of what she had done and who she had become. "My father used to say that mercy is not about whether someone deserves it." She spoke slowly, exhaustion making her words heavy. "It is about whether you are the kind of person who gives it anyway." He pulled people off the streets who stabbed each other over drug money. He saved gang members who shot children, and he never once asked whether they deserved to live. She turned to look at Morrow, and her eyes were clear despite her fatigue. "Briggs is a coward and a bully," she continued, "but he is also a human being who was bleeding to death. And I do not get to decide that some humans are worth less than others. That is not my choice to make." Morrow was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand, bloody glove and all. "You are remarkable," he said. "I hope you know that." Yara did not know how to respond. She had never thought of herself as remarkable. She had only ever thought of herself as someone trying to pay a debt she could never fully repay. But sitting there in the ruins of FOB Kestrel, with the sun rising over the mountains and the sounds of survival echoing around her, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Pride. The sun rose over FOB Kestrel like a benediction, golden light spilling across the devastation and making it almost beautiful. Soldiers moved through the wreckage with the slow deliberation of exhaustion, clearing debris, counting casualties, beginning the long process of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Yara remained at the improvised triage center, unable to stop working even though the immediate crisis had passed. There were still wounds to clean, bandages to change, IVs to monitor. The muscle memory of caregiving was the only thing keeping her upright. Word spread through the base like wildfire. The ghost girl had a name. The ghost girl had a face. The ghost girl was Specialist Yara Okonkwo, the quiet medic nobody had ever noticed, The woman who could barely make eye contact in the chow line, but had somehow saved half the wounded on the base during the worst attack in FOB Kestrel's history. They came to see her in ones and twos at first, then in larger groups. Soldiers she had treated during the night, soldiers she had treated in previous months, soldiers who had only heard the stories and wanted to see the legend for themselves. They stood at the edge of the triage area and watched her work with expressions that ranged from awe to disbelief. Yara felt their eyes on her like physical pressure. The old panic tried to rise, the desperate urge to flee from all this attention. But she was too tired to run, too tired to hide. So she just kept working, kept treating patients, kept being visible whether she wanted to be or not. Captain Sorensen arrived mid-morning. She walked into the triage center with the measured stride of an officer who had just survived a battle and was already planning for the next one. Her uniform was dusty and torn, a bandage wrapped around her left hand, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Specialist Okonkwo," she said. Yara straightened from the patient she was treating, forcing herself to meet the captain's gaze. "Mom, I have been receiving reports all morning." Sorensen's expression was unreadable. 37 confirmed saves in your triage. 12 more from the field before you established this position. Medical personnel from 3 different units citing your leadership as the reason they were able to function effectively. Yara did not know what to say. She had never counted. She had just worked. "I also received a report from the soldiers who found First Sergeant Briggs," Sorensen continued. "They told me what happened at the North Perimeter. They told me he froze. They told me a specialist died because of it." The words hung in the air between them. Yara remained silent. "And they told me that you treated his wounds anyway. That you saved the life of the man who was trying to end your career." Sorensen paused, something shifting in her expression. "Can you explain that to me, specialist?" "He was wounded," Yara said simply. "I am a medic." Sorensen studied her for a long moment, and Yara had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, examined, evaluated on criteria she did not fully understand. "The investigation into your activities is suspended," Sorensen finally said. "Given the circumstances of last night and the emerging testimony from approximately 4 dozen soldiers who credit you with saving their lives or the lives of their friends, I am recommending that all charges be dropped." Yara blinked. She had prepared herself for punishment. She had accepted that her career was over. This outcome had never occurred to her as a possibility. Additionally, Sorensen continued, "Colonel Warren is flying in tomorrow to personally review the situation. He has expressed interest in meeting the soldier responsible for our survival rate." She allowed herself a small smile. "I suggest you get some sleep before then. You look like you have been through a war." The joke was terrible, but Yara found herself almost smiling in return. "Thank you, ma'am. Do not thank me, specialist. Thank the soldiers who refused to let your actions go unrecognized." Sorensen turned to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, I knew something unusual was happening on this base. I chose not to investigate too closely because the outcomes were always positive. Perhaps that makes me complicit in your protocol violations. Or perhaps it makes you wise," Yara said, surprising herself with the response. Sorensen's smile widened slightly. "Perhaps it does." After the captain left, Morrow appeared with water and a protein bar that Yara did not remember asking for, but desperately needed. "You heard," she said. "The whole base heard." He handed her the water. "You are officially a hero, Yara. The ghost girl has a name, and that name is going to be impossible to ignore." Yara took a long drink, buying time to process everything that was happening. "I do not know how to be visible," she admitted. "I have spent my whole life learning how to disappear. This is the opposite of everything I know. Maybe that is the point." Morrow sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Maybe you were never supposed to stay invisible. Maybe you just needed to find a reason worth being seen for." The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors. Elizondo came first, his eyes red with exhaustion and something that looked like tears. "I thought you were going to die out there," he said, pulling her into a hug that she did not resist. "Every time I saw another explosion, I thought this is it. This is the one that takes her." "I promised I would try not to die," Yara reminded him. You are terrible at keeping promises. He pulled back and smiled through his tears. But I am glad you are terrible at this particular one. Whitley came next, the medic who had worked beside her all night. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice gruff with discomfort. I was helping Briggs build his case. I thought you were making us all look bad. He shook his head. I was wrong. You were making us all better. We just could not see it. Other soldiers followed. The corporal with the chest wound, now stable and conscious. The sergeant with a crushed throat, breathing on his own through the improvised tracheotomy. Dozens of others, some wounded, some whole, all wanting to see the woman who had become a legend. Yara accepted their thanks with increasing awkwardness, never quite knowing what to say, never quite comfortable with the attention. But she did not run. She did not hide. She stood in the light and let them see her, let them know her name, let them understand that the ghost girl was just a person who could not stop herself from helping. As the sun set over FOB Kestrel, painting the ruined base in shades of orange and gold, Yara finally allowed herself to rest. She found a quiet corner behind the triage building, the same kind of hidden spot she had always sought when the world became too much. But this time, she was not hiding from attention. She was simply tired. Tired in a way that went deeper than muscle and bone. Morrow found her there, of course. He always seemed to know where she would be. Colonel Warren arrives at 0800, he said, lowering himself to sit beside her. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you changed something on this base. You changed something in these soldiers. He paused. You changed something in me. Yara leaned her head against his shoulder, too exhausted for boundaries. I'm still scared, she admitted. Of tomorrow, of what comes next, of being someone that people know instead of someone they overlook. I know. Morrow put his arm around her, gentle and warm. But you do not have to face it alone anymore. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched over her countless midnight missions. But tonight they felt different. Tonight they felt like witnesses to something new. The ghost girl was gone. In her place stood someone braver, someone visible, someone ready to find out who she could become when she stopped hiding from the world. Yara closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her, falling asleep against Morrow's shoulder with the sounds of a rebuilding base echoing around them. Colonel Marcus Warren arrived at FOB Kestrel precisely at 0800. His Black Hawk touching down on the scarred landing pad with the practiced efficiency of a commander who had done this 1,000 times before. He was a compact man with silver at his temples and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of officer who had earned his rank through competence rather than politics. Captain Sorensen met him on the tarmac and escorted him through the damage assessment, pointing out the destroyed medical tent, the cratered perimeter walls, the improvised triage center that had become the stuff of legend overnight. Warren listened without interrupting, his expression neutral, his questions precise and pointed. When the tour reached the concrete building where Yara had established her field hospital, he stopped. This is where it happened, he said. Not a question. Yes, sir. Sorensen gestured toward the interior. Specialist Okonkwo organized triage operations here after the main medical facility was destroyed. She coordinated response for approximately 6 hours under continuous combat conditions. Warren stepped inside. The space had been cleaned, but evidence of the night's desperate work remained. Bloodstains on the concrete floor. For stands improvised from broom handles and wire. A surgical table made from shipping pallets covered in plastic sheeting. He examined everything with the careful attention of a man reconstructing events from physical evidence. Where's Specialist Okonkwo now? He asked. Waiting in my office, sir. As you requested. Warren nodded slowly. Bring her to me. Here. I want to see where she worked. Yara entered the building 5 minutes later. Her uniform clean for the first time in 2 days, her hands scrubbed raw, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun that could not quite contain its natural texture. She stood at attention before the colonel, her eyes fixed on a point approximately 6 inches above his left shoulder. At ease, specialist. Warren's voice was surprisingly gentle. Look at me. Yara forced her gaze down to meet his. The old panic fluttered in her chest, but it was muted now, manageable. She had faced worse than a colonel's scrutiny in the past 48 hours. "I have been reading about you," Warren said. "Your personnel file, your training records, the statement from soldiers you treated both during the attack and in the months preceding it." He paused. "You have been busy." "Yes, sir." "You also violated approximately 17 different regulations regarding unauthorized medical operations, supply management, and chain of command protocols." Warren's expression remained neutral. First Sergeant Briggs submitted a very thorough report on the subject. Yara felt her stomach tighten. She had known this was coming. The gratitude of soldiers did not erase the rules she had broken. "Yes, sir," she said again. "I did." Warren was quiet for a moment, studying her the way she imagined a surgeon might study an unusual case. "Do you know what I did before I commanded this battalion?" he asked. "No, sir. I was a special operations flight surgeon. Spent 6 years attached to units that do not officially exist, treating injuries that were never officially recorded in places that were never officially visited." He smiled slightly. "I know something about operating outside conventional parameters when lives are at stake." Yara did not know how to respond to that, so she remained silent. "The Army has rules for good reasons," Warren continued. "Structure, accountability, consistency. These things matter, especially in combat." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But the Army also needs people who understand that sometimes the rules do not account for reality. People who can adapt, improvise, save lives when the system fails." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I have 2 options for you, Specialist Okonkwo. The first is a formal reprimand. It goes in your file, follows you for the rest of your career, and you return to conventional duties with a permanent black mark on your record." Warren unfolded the paper. "The second option is a transfer. There's a special operations medical unit that has been looking for someone with your particular skill set. Unconventional thinkers. People who can operate independently in austere environments. People who run toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it." Yara stared at the paper in his hand. "Transfer orders. Already prepared. Already signed. The unit is classified," Warren said. "The work is dangerous. You would be operating in situations where official support is limited or non-existent." He met her eyes. "But you would also be doing exactly what you have been doing here, just with authorization instead of Article 15 charges." The choice was not really a choice at all. "I would like to transfer, sir," Yara said, her voice steady for perhaps the first time in a conversation with a superior officer. Warren smiled and handed her the paper. "I thought you might say that." He turned toward the door, then paused. "For what it is worth, Specialist, I spoke with First Sergeant Briggs this morning. He withdrew his complaint." Yara blinked. "He did. Apparently being saved by the person you were trying to destroy has a way of adjusting one's perspective." Warren shrugged. Or perhaps he simply realized that court-martialing the hero of FOB Kestrel would not play well with anyone above his pay grade. "Either way, your record remains clean." He left without further ceremony, and Yara stood alone in the building where she had saved 37 lives, holding transfer orders to a future she had never imagined possible. The news spread quickly through the base. Specialist Okonkwo was leaving. The Ghost Girl was moving on to bigger things. Special operations, classified missions, the kind of work that soldiers spoke about in whispers and half-truths. Elizondo found her packing her quarters that evening, her few possessions fitting easily into a single duffel bag. "I cannot believe you're actually leaving," he said from the doorway. "After everything we have been through." Yara turned to look at him, this young man who had kept her secret for months, who had covered for her absences, who had become something she had never expected to have. "A friend. You could come with me," she said. "Put in for a transfer. Special operations always needs good soldiers." Elizondo shook his head, but he was smiling. "I'm not built for that kind of life. I like rules. I like structure. I like knowing where I'm supposed to be and when." He stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. "But I'm glad you found where you belong." She held him tightly, this friend she had never asked for and could not imagine losing. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." When she released him, his eyes were wet. "You better write," he said, "or send coded messages. or whatever it is secret operatives do. I want to know you're still alive out there. I will try, Yara promised. And this time, she meant it. The hardest goodbye was Morrow. She found him at the perimeter wall, staring out at the mountains where the enemy had retreated. His weight shifted to favor his still healing leg. He did not turn when she approached, but she knew he was aware of her presence. "Colonel Warren offered me a transfer," she said. "I heard." Morrow's voice was carefully neutral. "Special operations. Very impressive. I am leaving tomorrow." He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was difficult to read. "I am proud of you," he said. "You know that, right? Whatever happens next, whatever missions they send you on, I am proud of who you have become." Yara felt tears prick at her eyes, an unfamiliar sensation that she did not try to fight. "I could not have done any of this without you," she said. "You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You saw me when I was trying so hard to be invisible." Morrow stepped closer and took her hands in his. "You were never invisible, Yara. You were just waiting for the right moment to step into the light." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Promise me you will take care of yourself out there. Promise me you will not forget that your life matters too." "I promise." He pulled her into an embrace, and she let herself be held, let herself feel the warmth and safety of connection that she had denied herself for so long. "This is not goodbye," she said against his shoulder. "I will find a way to stay in touch." "You better." Morrow pulled back and smiled, though his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because I still owe you a debt, Yara Okonkwo, and I always pay my debts." She laughed, the sound surprising her with its ease. "Consider it paid," she said, 1,000 times over. Yara's last night at FOB Kestrel was quiet in a way the base had not been since before the attack. The perimeter guards stood their posts with renewed vigilance. The repair crews had finished their emergency work for the day, and the soldiers who remained had settled into the exhausted peace that follows survival. She could not sleep. Instead, she found herself walking the path she had memorized during her months as the Ghost Girl. The gap in the patrol route near the eastern wire. The blind spot behind the motor pool. The shadow between barracks where she had slipped unseen so many times. These places had been her highways, her escape routes, the geography of a secret life that no longer needed to exist. The stray dog found her near the burn pit, emerging from his hiding spot with the cautious hope of an animal that had learned to expect pain but still remembered kindness. His ribs had healed well. His coat was growing back where the kicks had left bare patches. He pressed his muzzle in her palm, and Yara knelt to scratch behind his ears one last time. "I cannot take you with me," she whispered, "but I found someone who will look after you." Elizondo had agreed, without hesitation, when she asked. He had always been the kind of person who took care of things that needed caring for, and the dog would be safe with him. Safer than anywhere Yara was going. She stayed with the dog until the stars began to fade, until the first gray light of dawn touched the mountains, until she heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the barracks. Morrow appeared out of the shadows, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Could not sleep either," he said, handing her one. "Too much to think about." They stood together in the growing light, drinking coffee that was slightly too bitter and watching the base come alive around them. Soldiers emerging from quarters, stretching, preparing for another day of rebuilding. Life continuing despite everything that had tried to end it. "Do you remember what you asked me?" Yara said. "That first night when you followed me. You asked why I needed to understand." Morrow nodded. "And you asked why I needed to find you. I think I understand now." She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and calm in a way they had rarely been before. "You were not looking for a ghost. You were looking for proof that goodness still existed, that someone out there was fighting for strangers in the dark, asking nothing in return." "And you," he asked, "what were you looking for?" Yara considered the question. She thought about her father's hands, teaching her to suture wounds on practice dummies. She thought about the weight of his absence, the debt she had been trying to repay since the day he died. She thought about all the soldiers she had saved, all the families who would never receive the worst phone call of their lives because she had been there when they needed her. "I was looking for a reason to exist," she finally said. "I was looking for proof that I was supposed to be here." that my life had meaning beyond just taking up space. And did you find it? She smiled, and the expression felt natural in a way it never had before. I found something better. I found people worth existing for. The transport helicopter arrived at 0900, a Black Hawk with no unit markings and a crew that did not offer names or small talk. Yara's duffel was already loaded. Her transfer orders were in her pocket. Everything she owned fit in a single bag, but everything she was leaving behind could have filled an ocean. The soldiers of FOB Kestrel had gathered near the landing pad. Not in formation, not officially, just a crowd of men and women who wanted to say goodbye to the Ghost Girl one last time. Yara saw faces she recognized, faces she had treated, faces that were only alive because she had refused to let regulations determine who deserved to be saved. Captain Sorensen stepped forward first. It has been an honor, Specialist. She extended her hand, and Yara shook it firmly. Do us proud out there. Yes, ma'am. Whitley was next, awkward and sincere in equal measure. I still do not understand how you did it, he said. How you moved so fast. Knew exactly where to be. But I'm glad you were here. So, am I, Yara said. Other soldiers followed. Quick handshakes, brief words. The language of warriors who did not know how to express emotion, but felt it deeply nonetheless. Yara accepted each farewell with grace, surprised to find that the attention no longer felt like a weight. It felt like warmth. Elizondo was crying openly by the time he reached her. You changed my life, he said between sniffles. You know that, right? Before you, I was just going through the motions, serving my time. You show me that service can mean something more. Yara pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than military decorum usually allowed. Take care, my dog, she whispered. With my life, he promised. Moro waited until the others had said their goodbyes before approaching. He walked without his crutch now, his limp barely noticeable, another wound healed by time and stubbornness. So this is it, he said. This is it. They stood facing each other, two people who had found something unexpected in the chaos of war. Not romance, not exactly, but something equally rare. Understanding. Acceptance. The recognition of kindred spirits who had each been searching for redemption and found it in each other instead. I'm going to miss you, Yara said, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything. You're going to be too busy saving lives to miss anyone. Moro smiled, but his eyes were serious. But when you have a quiet moment, when you're sitting somewhere waiting for the next mission, think about this place. Think about the people who believe in you. And remember that you do not have to carry everything alone. Yara reached out and took his hand, squeezing once before letting go. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, for helping me become someone worth seeing. You were always worth seeing, Yara. The world just needed to catch up. The helicopter pilot signaled that it was time to go. Yara walked toward the Black Hawk, her steps steady, her head high. She climbed aboard and strapped in, looking out the open door at the crowd of soldiers watching her leave. The rotors spun up, the noise drowning out any possibility of final words. But as the helicopter lifted off, Yara saw Moro raise his hand in a simple salute. Around him, other soldiers did the same. Dozens of hands rising to foreheads, a gesture of respect for the woman who had saved them all. Yara returned the salute as FOB Kestrel grew smaller beneath her. The mountains rose on either side, ancient and indifferent, witnesses to centuries of conflict and survival. Somewhere among those peaks, enemies were regrouping, planning their next assault, dreaming of victory. And somewhere in the skies above them, a young medic was flying toward a future she could not imagine, carrying skills that would save countless lives in battles that would never make the news. The Ghost Girl was gone, but Specialist Yara Okonkwo was just getting started. If this story moved you, drop a comment and let us know what resonated most. Tell us about your favorite character or moment, or share a time when someone appeared in your life exactly when you needed them, someone who saw you when you felt invisible. Years later, the soldiers who served at FOB Kestrel during the Great Assault would still tell the story. They would speak of the night the Taliban tried to overrun them, and the quiet medic who emerged from the shadows to save them all. They would describe her steady hands and calm voice, her refusal to give up on anyone, her mercy even for those who did not deserve it. Some called her a hero. Others called her an angel. A few, the ones who knew her best, simply called her by name. But to the soldiers who survived because of her, who went home to families that would have mourned them, who lived to see their children grow up, she would always be something more. She would always be the ghost girl, the one who saved them all.